G'day legends and welcome back to Flock, your home for everything New Orleans Pelicans, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Lyle Swithenbank, and today we're diving into something that's been simmering for a while now. Why don't the New Orleans Pelicans get the love they deserve from the national media? Now, before we get the pitchforks out, let's break it down. Now, let's be honest, the Pelicans are not your typical NBA darling. They're just not. We're not a legacy team. We don't have the glitz and glamour of LA or New York. And yeah, we haven't exactly been mainstays in the NBA playoffs. Never made a Western Conference Finals. But despite that, there's been talent. Zion Williamson, when he's on the floor, is a generational force. We know that. We've had fringe all-stars in Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, and more recently DeJounte Murray. And that's helped form a pretty formidable team around Zion, on paper at least. A great supporting cast of Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Jose Alvarado. Gosh, the list goes on. We've had Jonas Valanciunas, a number of players that have been fantastic for us. The roster's deep, it's been competitive, and it's been young. And fast forward to this season, Joe Dumars, he takes over after David Griffin. CJ sent out to Washington. Of course, Brandon Ingram shipped out middle of last season. And in comes Jordan Poole, Kevon Looney, Sadiq Bey. The team has some buzzy names, some really buzzy names on paper. Yet if you scroll through ESPN or turn on TNT, you'd be lucky to hear more than a passing mention of the Pels, unless someone's hurt. Now let's start with what we mean when we say national media in the NBA world. We're talking about the outlets that shape narratives, perceptions across the league. Think ESPN, TNT, Bleacher Report, The Ringer, The Athletic, FS1, and so on. These platforms don't just report news. They create storylines that casual fans want to latch onto. They decide who's hot, who's cold, and who's even worth talking about. If you watch or read any of these platforms regularly, you know the Pelicans don't exactly top their priority list. There's stretches where you wouldn't even know New Orleans had a team. Unless Zion does a 360 dunk, or he gets injured, or for some unknown reason, they decide that the team needs to get up and move again. Coverage is heavily skewed towards a few mainstays. Lakers get 10 times more coverage, win or lose. Same with the Warriors, Knicks, Celtics, and the Nuggets, more recently because of Jokic's dominance. These teams are good stories, sure, but media coverage also comes down to market size and established fan bases. National outlets cater to the masses, and that means more clicks for the team with decades of national recognition. And of course, I'm preaching to the converter, we know this is the case. But the result? Teams like the Pelicans get lumped into the irrelevant until proven otherwise. Even when New Orleans is playing exciting, competitive basketball, and the narrative stays stuck in preseason mode. There's a clear media inertia that needs some serious winning or controversy, more often than not, to shift. Now, the lack of coverage doesn't just affect fans' perception either. It affects all-star votes, award races, national game scheduling. It creates a feedback loop. Low coverage leads to low awareness, which leads to less recognition, which leads to, you guessed it, even less coverage. And that's frustrating, especially when you know the talent's there. That's what stings the most. There's plenty of talent on this Pelicans team. But because while the national media might be sleeping, Pelicans fans and local media know this team has been building something real. We just need the rest of the world to catch up. I think we have to step back to fully understand the perception of this issue. Let's rewind, and we're just going to talk a little bit about the history. The franchise, originally the Charlotte Hornets, it moved to New Orleans in 2002. As we know, it wasn't exactly a clean transition. There was relocation, ownership uncertainty, and then the devastation of course, Hurricane Katrina, which forced the team to temporarily move to Oklahoma City. That period disrupted the franchise's identity. When the team came back to New Orleans, the momentum never fully recovered. They tried really, really hard, let's be honest. But that was devastating. And even when Chris Paul was running the show and the Hornets were a playoff team, they never really quite captured the national imagination. And why? Again, it's a small market. Limited playoff success and no real media champions pushing the story. It's hard to have, a huge reputation nationally if the national representatives don't want to talk about you. And then, of course, Anthony Davis era started. AD was supposed to be the superstar that changed everything. But again, injuries, coaching turnovers, front office drama, limited postseason success meant the Pelicans were rarely top of mind nationally. And even AD's playoff sweep of the Blazers in 2018 didn't move the needle much. The team's lack of continuity has hurt. New coaches, changing GMs, fluctuating rosters. It's hard to build a strong national media narrative when the story keeps resetting. The Warriors, Bucks and Celtics have had years of consistent cause and leadership. That builds attention. The Pelicans haven't had that luxury. They just haven't. And let's not forget that the NBA literally owning the franchise for a period of time during the CP3 trade. Gosh, what a saga that was. And that only further delegitimized the franchise in the eyes of the public, even though the blame doesn't lie with New Orleans itself. It doesn't. The fans have been there. Build it and they will come. That's the reality. But all this means that when the national media looks at New Orleans, they don't see a real contender. They see a team in transition, in constant flux. But as we'll explore later, the view is outdated, and I'm at the point where I think it's lazy. The Pelicans of 2025 are not the Pelicans of 2010 or 2018. So, let's talk about the biggest buzzy name that the Pelicans have. And let's talk about Zion Williamson. Because he's been both a media darling and he's been a media scapegoat. We know that. When Zion was drafted first overall in 2019, the game and hype and excitement that he brought was enormous. He was billed as the next LeBron. ESPN was airing his high school games. He had national commercials before playing an NBA minute. The NBA scheduled multiple national TV games featuring New Orleans purely based on Zion hype. That was the last time we had a Christmas Day game. He didn't even play in it. And early on, after a stuttering start delayed by injury, he delivered. Explosive dunks, efficient scoring, highlight reels that went viral in seconds. He was living up to the billing when he played. And that's where the media love story ended. Zion's injuries became the dominant narrative. He missed his rookie debut. He missed the entire 2021-22 season. Every absence became a media talking point, usually served with a side of skepticism. Is he committed? Is he out of shape? Does he want to be here? And suddenly the same outlets that had hyped him up were tearing him down. The injuries became the story, not the basketball. And once again, New Orleans became a footnote in a larger conversation about potential and disappointment, time and time again. But here's what the national media doesn't emphasise enough. When Zion plays, he's historically efficient. He scores 25 a night on absurd shooting splits. He makes his teammates better, he opens up the floor for shooters, and he has gravity. Real gravity that makes opposing defences panic. If Zion played in New York or LA, his return games would be events. In New Orleans, they're treated like a curiosity. Oh, he's playing? Well, let's see how long this lasts. That bias affects the whole team. It shaped how BI was viewed. It overshadows Herb and Trey. It also fuels a chip on the shoulder mentality, and maybe that's not the worst thing. Because a healthy Zion leading a hungry squad, that's a story worth watching, and it's just one the national media hasn't woken up to yet. So this is where it gets systematic. Small market bias is real in the NBA, and New Orleans might be the most underrated example. Media attention and TV deals aren't spread evenly across the league. They're concentrated in major markets with big populations and decades of media legacy. New York, LA, Chicago, Boston. They dominate airtime coverage and narratives. New Orleans, it's a football-first town in the eyes of the national broadcasters. The Saints games draw huge numbers. The Pelicans are often treated like a secondary act, even though the city has a rich basketball culture and die-hard growing fan base. And here's the thing, it's not just about the coverage. It affects actual league dynamics. National games influence player visibility, which influences endorsement deals, which influences player decisions in free agency. A lack of exposure has real consequences. It does. And when was the last time the Pelicans had a Christmas Day game? It was 2019 when Zion was drafted. Or even a full season slate of national broadcasts. Probably fairly similar time period. The NBA is pushing the same teams over and over and over again, and the repetition reinforces the cycle of who matters. Even teams like Memphis, Sacramento, who have had playoff success recently, struggle for respect. It's not just about talent, it's about market footprint, media access, and history. The frustrating part is the Pelicans do have a story worth telling. A young, homegrown roster, smart drafting, player development, a passionate fan base, a beautiful city with culture and pride. It just doesn't fit the easy media narrative, so it gets overlooked. But the small market isn't a weakness. It's part of the identity. And it means that when New Orleans finally gets over the hump, it'll be that much sweeter. Because we know how hard it was to get here. So, let's take a beat. Let's flip it. What are the Pelicans missing? What are the national outlets failing to see when it comes to the Pelicans? Well, let's start with the roster. The team is stacked with two-way players. Herb Jones, arguably top five perimeter defender in the league. That's, Herb Jones, first team all defense, we say it. He's developed into a reliable corner three-point shooter, but you barely know it if you watched ESPN highlights. You wouldn't know who he was. Trey Murphy III, 6'10", sharpshooter, insane bounce. He's tailor-made for the modern game, but they barely talk about him. It's not until he's had to go on ESPN and, start doing a bit of the journalistic stuff that he's starting to build a bit of a presence. Jordan Poole is an NBA champion with the Warriors, dynamic 20 points per game a night scorer. But after being in Washington, another rebuilding team, he has the opportunity to reintroduce himself to the league. What he doesn't have is the off-court drama or social media presence that the media feeds on. Of course, excluding being on the receiving end of Draymond Green's antics in most recent times. You've got new additions, DeJounte Murray, former All-Star. He's coming off an Achilles. He's shown a willingness to be a vocal leader of this young team. Kevon Looney brings leadership, screen setting, rebounding, skills that the Pelicans sorely missed this year, or last year. Yves Missi has a real rim-protecting potential. Derek Queen, Jeremiah Fears, these guys might be the next wave of top-tier talent. But if you talk to the average NBA fan, they'll be saying, who's that? Of course, there are question marks about Willie Green as a coach, unless you speak to the national media who love him. But like any coach of an underperforming team, there is pressure for him to succeed this year. What he is consistent with is he's consistent that he preaches culture and accountability. He created an identity which at times, due to his coaching development and player buy-in, and of course injuries, has not translated to winning. We had the 49-win season. A lot of that was based on talent. The team has shooting, it has defense, youth, and leadership. But because they don't have a loudmouth star or a big city drama, they get skipped over. But that's on the media, and it won't last forever. Winning changes everything. And when the Pelicans finally hit their stride, it'll be impossible to ignore. Look, the Pelicans might never be a media darling, and that's alright. But this team deserves more respect, more coverage, more credit for what they're building. So if you're tired of the silence, stick with Flock. Because we're not waiting on the national folk to catch up. We're already telling this story. So make sure you subscribe. You're going to rate the show. You're going to follow on socials at Lyle Swithenbank. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you drop a comment. What do you think it'll take for the Pelicans to get that national love? I'll see you next episode. But until then, let's flock and go. Bye for now.